The PlayStation 2 is the best-selling home console of all time, so naturally there were tons of great JRPGs. On the PS2, voice acting became more common and many franchises began that are still going strong today. I'm sure I'll be leaving out someone's favorite, but in today's video I'll be sharing what I believe are the 10 must-play PS2 JRPGs. And this is an ongoing series where I'll be looking at every system's must-play JRPGs, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming list. Final Fantasy X is considered many people's favorite Final Fantasy, and for good reason. In my opinion, it has the best turn-based combat system in the entire series. You can clearly see the turn order at all times, you can swap out party members on the fly, and every character has a pretty defined role. For example, Lulu is the mage, Auron is a high damage dealer, and Yuna kinda pulls double duty as a summoner and a white mage. Now we all like to laugh at the voice acting, but I feel like this helped us get attached to characters in a whole new way. Throughout the game we hear Tidus' internal dialogue as he struggles with this journey and learning more about him. And as we meet Yuna and we learn about her plight trying to defeat Sin, it really pulls you in a really interesting way. I feel like there's something lost in just text, so I feel like voice acting really makes the story that much more powerful. Final Fantasy X also has a gorgeous world. It's sort of a tropical meets futuristic, a very unique locale that very few games really take part in. And of course you can't talk about Final Fantasy X without the incredible music, in particular the piano tune to Xanarkand. It's just iconic. Now this was the last mainline single-player Final Fantasy that Nobuo Uematsu would compose, so I feel like it makes it that much more special. Oh, and I'd be remiss to not talk about Blitzball. I personally didn't care for it, but it seems to be one of the more beloved minigames in all of Final Fantasy. One of the most unique games on the entire system is Dark Cloud. Now Dark Cloud 2 might be the better game, but I wanted to include the original for a few reasons. This was actually Level 5's first game. They went on to make classics like Ni no Kuni, Yokai Watch, and tons of other games on this list. This was also one of the first must-have games for the system, so understanding that context I think is important. What made Dark Cloud so compelling was its blend of action dungeon crawling combat and town building gameplay. What was cool is you would explore randomly generated dungeons and collect combat items and pieces of the town. Once you returned to the town, you would place these items down based on residents' preferences, or simply however you thought looked cool. As you moved on to new worlds, you would recruit new party members with different exploration and combat abilities. This was a highly addictive game loop, and really we had never really seen anything like this kind of gameplay at the time. Now what's interesting is it didn't sell super well in Japan initially, but it sold super well in the West. It might have had something to do with the fact that the main character looked a lot like Link from The Legend of Zelda. Whatever the case might be, this is a highly beloved series and people are still clamoring for a third game today. Persona 4 might be really well known for its golden remaster, but back on the PS2 it was a really late release that was kind of forgotten. Obviously as time has gone on, more people have found it and fallen in love with it. I think what makes Persona 4 so compelling is its unique blend of dungeon crawling gameplay and life sim aspects. You would explore dungeons, find and capture new demons, and learn more about characters' deepest insecurities. And you got to know these characters even deeper through social links. These are character-specific story events where you learn about them and also gain new advantages in combat. This is a really addictive and clever way to mix both gameplay aspects. But I think what really has made this game endure over the years is the characters. It felt like a real group of friends that you would get super attached to. And I think what really helped were the character-specific dungeons. In Persona 3 you had Tartarus, which was just a big tower with no personality. In Persona 5 the dungeons were more about the villains, but in Persona 4 they were all about your party members, and I feel like through those dungeons you got a greater sense of attachment to each character. And by the end it was sad to say goodbye to them. Now if you somehow are watching this and haven't played it yet, no matter what version you play, find a way to check it out. Dragon Quest VIII is one of the best games in the series and was most people's first introduction to the series in the West. Like most entries in the series, it has a grand sense of adventure. The fully orchestrated soundtrack is absolutely beautiful and really invites you to explore this world. This is also the first fully 3D entry with a huge gorgeous world to explore, and it was fun to just run around and explore each location. And what was neat is each town felt so distinct. Of course, Dragon Quest VIII has a delightful cast of characters. To kick things off, you have a really unique posse. You have this frog who's actually a king, accompanied by a horse who's actually his daughter, the princess. Of course, as the story goes on, you'll have even more characters you'll meet, like the loyal Yangus and the spunky, sexy Jessica. Now I will say, I feel like the game's a little grindy. You have to do a lot of extra battles just to compete with bosses. The 3DS version fixes this a little bit, but even then I still felt it was a little grindy. Now the only bummer part about the 3DS is that it's kind of a downgrade in both the music and visual quality. It's almost a demake instead of a remake. Now in case it wasn't clear why you need to play this game, this is in the thumbnail of the video. That's how important this game is to the PlayStation 2. So whether it's the PS2 version or the 3DS version, find a way to play this because it's definitely a must play. Admittedly, the series lore of Kingdom Hearts is a convoluted mess, but there was a simplistic charm to the original. Now, some in the comments are probably going to say that 2 was the better game, but I feel like you'd be incredibly lost if you started there. If you somehow don't know what Kingdom Hearts is, essentially it's Final Fantasy meets Disney. You play as Sora and he's trying to find his friends through these different Disney worlds. You'll travel through these Disney worlds, which are essentially truncated versions of the Disney films, and you'll fight along familiar characters like Aladdin, Peter Pan, and Simba. And you will occasionally run into Final Fantasy characters who have minor roles throughout the game. Of course, you're always joined by your trusty companions, Donald Duck and Goofy. Now, the combat kind of felt like a floaty hack and slash action combat. At a quick glance, it seems pretty simplistic, but as the game goes on, it gets quite challenging. Now, I feel like the main draw of this game and the series as a whole is its charm and nostalgia. Never before have we been able to explore Disney worlds like this in a video game. If you can survive Game 1, consider diving into the rest of the series because they're very easily playable either on the PS3 or the PS4 collections. The Tales series has changed its combat and art style quite a bit over the years, but Tales of the Abyss is considered one of the fan favorites. Now, people like to hate on Luke, but he has a really compelling arc. If you just stick with it, the story actually pays off. The crux of the story is that Luke is a spoiled prince who's been sheltered his whole life and is forced to go on the run as there's a group trying to chase him down. At first, he's a spoiled brat, he doesn't like anything he has to do, but he grows throughout the game. One of the main draws to the Tales series as a whole is its action combat, and it really came into its own with Tales of the Abyss. It's super fast, fluid, and fun. And with Abyss, you had more freedom of movement than past games. Tales of the Abyss also has co-op if you have a certain item, the only game on this list that can claim that. Something I always say about the Tales games is that they're RPG comfort food. They may not blow you away in any particular aspect, but it has a lot of solid familiar elements that make it super fun to play. Horror-themed RPGs are pretty rare, and for that reason alone I had to include Shadow Hearts on this list. Much like with Kingdom Hearts, Shadow Hearts' sequel Covenant is considered by many to be the superior game, but its story relies heavily on beating the original. And like I said, it is a horror RPG, and it borrows a lot of elements from Lovecraftian lore, some of which bleed into the gameplay like sanity points that I'll touch on in a minute. Throughout Shadow Hearts, you'll travel across China and Europe, specifically Shanghai and London during 1913 and 1914. It was pretty neat to see more modern locations in an RPG as opposed to more fantasy or far future ones. I gotta say, I think Shadow Hearts might appeal to those Parasite Eve fans out there. One of the other main draws of Shadow Hearts was its unique combat thanks to the Judgment Ring. Essentially, these were timed button presses like something you might find in Legend of Dragoon, although you could actually see these coming thanks to it being more like a clock. Throughout combat, you also had sanity points, and these would slowly deplete. If they ever reached 0, your character would go berserk and you couldn't control them, so it was important to keep items stocked to refill that stat. Bosses could also be pretty tough with status effects that you can't see coming unless you've already played the fight before, so I would recommend using a guide unless you don't mind fighting bosses multiple times. Xenosaga Episode 1 is one of the most unique games on this list for a few reasons. For one, it's the only game with a female protagonist, one of the few games on this list with a futuristic sci-fi setting, and it has an outrageous amount of cinematics. Xenosaga Episode 1 is set in the far future where humanity has long since left Earth. Throughout the game, you'll fight alien races, battle with badass androids, and so much more. The story does make up so much of the game, so I'll let you discover it all for yourself. The story does, however, play out pretty linearly, so don't expect a ton of exploration. Now, the combat is turn-based with a party of 3. Different attacks are assigned to face buttons, and you can also call upon mechs to dish out bigger damage. The leveling system is cool in that you can kind of build out your character how you wanted. As you level up, you are awarded ether, tech, and skill points, which you could allocate however you wanted to earn abilities. Now, this is sort of a spiritual sequel to Xenogears, although it has no official ties. It was, however, created by the same creator of Xenogears, so if you enjoyed that game, definitely consider giving Xenosaga a try. Disgaea is one of the longest running JRPG franchises of all time, and it all started right here on the PS2. At its core, it's a turn-based strategy RPG, but like most games on this list, it has a lot of unique elements. For one, you play as Laharl, who's kind of the bad guy, the prince of the underworld. And the story is very wacky, very anime, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. One of the unique elements and one of the main draws to the Disgaea series are the item worlds. You could battle through levels inside an item to level up that item. Essentially, this gave the game endless replayability. There were a few other wacky combat elements like geo panels, which were colored panels that could create massive chain attacks and other effects. You could also pick up characters and throw them, either for strategic reasons or just for fun. To say the least, Disgaea is such a neat, unique series, and if you haven't seen where it all started, then you're missing out. Last but certainly not least on this list is Rogue Galaxy. Now, this was one of PS2's swan songs released in early 2007, a few months after PS3 had already been out. Now, the plot is very similar to Star Wars. You play as Jaster Rogue, who's an agricultural worker on an isolated planet, and the fate of the galaxy is in his hands. Sound familiar? It's worth noting that this was far and away Level 5's biggest game yet and took over 3 years to develop. By the way, for those keeping score at home, this is Level 5's third game on this list. To say the least, they were on a roll during the PS2. For Rogue Galaxy, they returned to action combat. The system was fast, fluid, and fun, and just had a great control scheme. Now, you couldn't hack and slash to infinity. There was a cooldown on your attack bar that you either had to wait to refill or had to block successfully. There were also special moves called burning strikes that would slowly build up over time and required timed button presses to deal even more damage. Leveling was similar to Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid in that stats weren't automatically doled out. You kind of had the freedom to build your characters however you wanted. Now, this was a super ambitious PS2 game, and it felt like it could have been a PS3 game, and probably should have, considering it didn't sell that well. What's neat though is this is available in HD with trophies as a digital download on PS4, so if you want to check it out, you can easily play it right now. Now, as I said at the beginning, this is a part of an ongoing series, and if you missed my last video, definitely check it out as I talk about the 10 must-play PS1 JRPGs. And if you found this video helpful, definitely give it a like, and if you want to know what all the other must-play JRPGs are in every system, definitely subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.